From PBS NewsHour's Student Reporting Labs
and WETA,
this is On Our Minds
with Ashley
and Tyler,
a podcast about the teenage experience made by teenagers for teenagers.
Because we all need a place to feel heard. Hey Ashley.
Hey.
So we're recording this episode before the holidays, but this is going to be coming out in early January. So we just want to say Happy New Year to all of our listeners. We have a special conversation with a reporter who covers teen mental health.
Yes, we got to speak with Matt Richtel, who's a journalist for the New York Times. And as a good journalist, he had a lot of questions for us too.
Before we go into it, we should let you know that self-harm and suicide come up in this conversation. If you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources. Here we are now speaking with Matt.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. You're a journalist with the New York Times, and you've been reporting on teenage mental health for a number of years. Could you start by first telling us when and how you started exploring this topic?
I am a parent, and my kids got to the teenage years, and I started having conversations about teen mental health and reading the stories that were going around about mental health with a different level of interest. And then I discovered something interesting. How's that for a lead-in?
It was very good. It was a very good hook.
What really struck me as I began to look into this is a different set of statistics. Over the last 30 years, as anxiety and depression and self-harm have risen, there's been a sharp decline in a series of other risks that affected my generation. Teen pregnancy is sharply down. Cigarette smoking is sharply down. Even with vaping, drug use is down. In other words, you guys, there had been a profound transformation, or there has been one, in the risks faced by adolescents. That's what made me go, whoa, something's up. Now, let me ask you guys, I'm just curious, when did the idea of teen mental health get on your radar? When did those words even have meaning to you?
For me, teen mental health probably became something that I thought more and more about as I got into, say, maybe 7th or 8th grade. A lot of stuff was happening at home and in my personal life and everything and at school. And I started hearing a lot about problems with mental health, and that became something that was now on my radar. But honestly, teen mental health really became something that I thought a lot more about during the pandemic and after the pandemic.
I think that for me, mental health has always been a very big part of my life because I do have my own history of mental health. Everybody has a history of mental health. I think that I started to realize that not only was I struggling, but a lot of the people around me were struggling. And I was like, maybe this isn't just a me thing. Maybe this is something that people around me are relating to. And maybe there's a larger reason for why so many of us are going through the same thing.
I'm thinking back to 7th grade at Casey Junior High in Boulder, Colorado. Nobody ever thought to say they were anxious or depressed or sad. There was no language. There were no words. One of the first questions that I had to address, and I think that science continues to grapple with, is, was this here all along? Or did we just start to put language to something that is much more commonplace than we realized? When you talk to your folks about this, what's your sense of what they experienced or think you're experiencing?
My parents are immigrants, so their experience growing up was obviously very different from mine. They both grew up in China, where the conversation about mental health, similarly to the US, was not as developed as it is now because there was also a language barrier. Some of the conversations that we were having were just us talking in circles around each other because our understandings of mental health were so incredibly different from each other. And I think there was also a lot of stigmatization that stopped us from having very coherent, meaningful conversations. But I think we've gotten a lot better at that.
My father was a military kid and he traveled a lot when he was growing up. So he always talks about how he had to learn how to make friends quickly and he had to learn how to develop a very thick skin because people would just talk about him and bully pretty ruthlessly, and especially when you were always a new kid. But I think that now he really puts an emphasis on mental health and talking about that and reaching out and making sure that it's something that's kind of like known and important. And we talk about it almost all the time, honestly.
When I ask that question, was this here all along? The answer I generally get is some of it was here all along. Something also has changed. In 2019, 13% of adolescents reported having a major depressive episode. That's up 60% from 2007. So by 2007, we were already talking about this. I think young people were suffering more. What is your knee-jerk reaction, or even highly educated guess somewhere on that spectrum about what's going on?
I was talking to my teacher the other day, and I was showing her TikToks, but she kind of just looked at me and she was like, how do you guys even function? Like, you guys are taking in so much information every single day, every single minute. And I think that with the rise of the digital age, we as people are just constantly taking in like new information, not just like about our surroundings, but about everything everywhere. Like, we're hearing about wars in countries that are thousands of miles away.
This may be in spite of or because of the internet. People have begun to talk about mental health a lot more than they did a while ago or even when I was younger.
Mental health, in a certain respect, is a collision of a brain and the environment. Or, to put another way, let's call it an intersection of the brain and the environment. And brains are on a spectrum of vulnerability to all kinds of things: fear, love, happiness. And we're all on spectrums of different facets of mental health, for everywhere from basic well-being to severe depression or anxiety and so forth. And those things can be immensely impacted by the environment we're in. There are two things going on right now that appear to be playing a role. And when I say appear to be playing a role, I want to be clear that we're right in the midst of this. And oftentimes science is trying to play catch up with things that are imminent. One of those things, which you guys both allude to, is this explosion, this volume of information. It's way too simplistic to say social media. The information driven by technology is coming from all over. That's the environment. The other piece is the adolescent brain. It has always been vulnerable in certain ways. That is by evolutionary design. It is a period of ambiguity in which young people can explore the world, try to figure out what's going on, try on identities, where they fit in. But when that brain is particularly vulnerable and this onslaught of information comes, there can be a kind of shutdown that happens. Have you guys ever had the feeling of anxiety where your body just is like frozen?
Absolutely. Constantly. When I'm feeling extreme anxiety, I feel things like, oh, my heart is beating really fast. I can't breathe. Like, I can't focus. Like, everything's going like 1,000 miles at once. When I look back on it, I'm like, wow, that feels like a survival instinct. Like, that feels like my fight or flight is going off. Like, I'm trying to get out of there as fast as possible. And so I think that it's fair to call it a coping mechanism, because I'm sure my body thinks it's doing the right thing. My brain just does not agree with what it's doing.
What we're seeing is some people who are particularly susceptible having their brains reach an overload point and go into one of these modes. We see this express itself as obsessive compulsive disorder, self-harm, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety. You can see where if you've got a vulnerable brain and an intense environment, they could collide to create some challenges. I want to add one last piece of hard science. In 1900, puberty hit girls on average at the age of 14. That was menstruation. Boys, it's a little hard to measure because there's not that single moment like menstruation, but boys were considered to be about a year behind. Now, girls are hitting it at 12, and boys are hitting it, say, a year behind girls, but they have also moved down. Why does that matter? Well, when you hit puberty, your brain becomes particularly aware of social information, craving of social information. Why is that? Because you're making a transition into adulthood where you have to find your place in the world. If a ton of information is coming at you at the very moment you're craving it, your antenna are up, then you can be thrown off. Here's the twist in all of this. When puberty happens earlier, it doesn't mean the rest of the brain develops any earlier. So the parts of the brain that help make sense of all that social information aren't necessarily developed.
When puberty starts earlier, it can come with a series of mental health issues potentially. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what this means for someone in their everyday life?
There is some really good news out of this. I would even go so far as to call it potentially great news. The potentially great news is, as we understand these mechanisms, as we understand the onset of anxiety and depression and give it names, there are many tools that young people can use to begin to see what's happening, give language to what's happening, and begin to, let's say, this might be too big of a word for this, but metabolize that experience. Have it move through them without doing as much harm. See it for what it is, which is a temporary emotional state, rather than something to ruminate and become obsessed by and act upon. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there's these trainings like cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy that help teach us all. I don't want to put young people in this. I've learned these things myself, to recognize the onset of an intense emotion and try to grapple with it as this temporary state, rather than to, wrestle it to the ground or have it paralyze you for a period of time.
Students who have worked on this podcast have said that their mental health has been able to improve because talking about their experience really helps them get through it. I know for me personally, it helps me feel less alone, and it helps me be able to feel like I can connect with other people by knowing that other people across the country are going through some of the same things I'm going through.
I love that. I'm going to give you hardcore science, baby. It's probably not what you expect. Yes, you are gaining support. Yes, you are connecting with people, but you're doing something else inside your brain. When you have an intense emotion, that feeling of being overwhelmed, and you're almost paralyzed by it, what the research is suggesting is, as people begin to put language to this thing, they move from this raw emotional state into one that begins to connect the logical parts of the brain to the emotional parts of the brain, and maybe can help people tunnel out of these experiences. So actually, there's some real reasons why the neuroscience would support the experience you're having beyond merely just having someone to talk to. So my advice is, I guess, twofold. First, when you hit that really intense emotional state, recognize it for what it is. It's a moment where you're overwhelmed and the emotions you're experiencing need to be calmed down and burst. And maybe, first of all, taking some steps like exercise, if you can, it's really hard, splashing water on your face, getting that intense emotion to stop, and then putting language to it could help you tunnel out from that deep thought.
I have one question. This isn't actually written down, but I was thinking about it when you were talking.
I love the questions that aren't written down. That's curiosity at work.
As you see my generation growing up, right? Like Gen Z, how are these effects on mental health that you studied when these people were teenagers? How do you see them being carried on into adulthood?
I don't think we've seen the full of it yet, but I'll say a couple of things that come to mind. My observation is you are winding up with a ton more wisdom than prior generations. I think you're hitting these challenges at an earlier stage, and it's going to serve you well and make you more compassionate. The one wrinkle I want to give in this, and this is a message I would send to the adults less so than the adolescents. Public policy has not kept up. And so what that means is we don't have the services in place as a society to help people learn those skills. We're almost still at a time of dealing predominantly with those risks of old. Remember the drunk driving and the cigarettes and all that? Our medical systems are built around that old stuff. We're going to have to adapt. Have you guys had any friends or known anybody who's gone to the emergency room with a mental health issue?
Yes.
Tell me their experience if you're comfortable.
I know a lot of people who are on medication who have like received medical help for their mental health problems, and we felt like we couldn't speak out about these issues to the adults around us because they wouldn't understand the issues we were going through.
Because of the fact that like so many young people are having to deal with these issues, it's become difficult for the parents to really understand how to deal with this. And so like they may get help or treatment for a little bit or go to the ER or go somewhere to get help. It's just that friction between the parents and the children because it's hard to really understand what you're doing when there's really never been any kind of conversation about this in the past.
Between 1,000 and 5,000 young people a night are sleeping in emergency departments with mental health issues. And the reason they're doing that is that these young people are either mostly at risk to themselves and some to others, and there's nowhere else for them to go. There's no inpatient settings. The parents are not equipped to keep them safe, or the doctors fear that they're legally obliged to keep them overnight because they don't want anyone to get hurt. Because we don't have the right interventions early, young people are winding up in this really scary situation in a place really not equipped to be dealing with this, emergency rooms. And Tyler, to your point, I think also because parents are not exactly sure, sometimes they're taking them to emergency departments either because there hasn't been an early intervention, or we're not all speaking the same language, or just flatly, we as parents get terrified, and maybe rightfully so. Until we come up to speed as a society with public policy, we're going to be facing situations that may actually make things worse for the people who are suffering. We're at the very early stages of a conversation that could lead to a wonderful inflection point. But we're going to have to do some work as a society.
Ashley and I are just starting our season as hosts for On Our Minds. What advice do you have for us and other teenagers who want to report on mental health or just get involved in the conversation?
My advice with regard to this subject is the same as any subject. I urge you to be authentic listeners. Set aside what you think you know. Be willing to challenge your biases. Don't treat anybody as if they're less than you under any circumstance. I learned this from a guy I met who I'd interviewed who'd been in AA. And he said he learned to get sober when he discovered these magical words. And I impart them to you. I am worthy, but I am no more worthy. As you approach your subjects, I urge you to think, I am as worthy of these people to have a thought, an opinion, a question, but I am no more worthy than they are. We are all worthy creatures on this planet. If you can carry that into your journalism, man, come get my job. You deserve it.
Genuinely, thank you so much for speaking with us today, and thank you for all the work that you've done on teenage mental health.
I'm so happy to meet you guys. It's just awesome what you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Next up, LeBron James, We Promise.
You mean I Promise, since the students who spoke with him are from I Promise School.
This is very Disney Channel transition.
Very cheesy.
And Tyler and I got to speak with those I Promise middle school reporters. Please make sure to take a listen.
Theme music.
I'm loving it.
Today's episode was produced by youth media producer Briget Ganske with help from production assistant Jayla Moore Ross.
Editorial director Marie Kusick and executive producer Leah Clapman.
Theme music by Jackson Teedens.
Additional music by Blue Dot Sessions.
Many thanks to the Arthur Vining Davis Foundation.
And if you or someone you know needs help, we have a list of resources at studentreportinglabs.org/mental health resources.
Also, please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It really makes a difference. So please leave a review.
Please.
Please.
Oh, please. Please.
Please.